So just to frame it for folks, there are three main techniques I think that you listed in the research, which is world building, perspective shifting, and action generating. Sort of like three types of techniques. If that's still sort of important to the conversation, can you perhaps like define and maybe give an example of each of those three?
Sure. So, I mean, the simplest way to think about these are all versions of story thinking. So, story thinking is your brain thinking
Right.
in story. And when we think of what exists in a story, there are three main things that exist in a story. There are the characters who are in the story, there's the plot of the story, and then there's the world in which the story takes place. And so let's start with world building. So one of the things we do all the time naturally when we're kids or when we're writing a fantasy or a sci-fi novel is we change the rules of action. We say, okay, in this world, it's possible for people to fly. Or in this world, it's possible for humans to breathe carbon dioxide or whatever. And once you make that tiny shift, all of a sudden, everything changes. One tiny shift in that rule of the world causes everything to change. And so one of the things that we immediately encourage people to start to put pressure on is the rules of their world. And we say, let's identify the rules of your operating space. What are the rules that you work under? We sell insurance to these people and they come to us for this, that, and the other thing. And say, okay, fine. Now I want you to identify one of those rules and I want you to change it. Once you've changed that rule, I then want you to cash out all the consequences of that one change. And I don't want you to just stop with one thing. I want you to play it forward a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. I want you to keep pushing as far as you can go into a new world. See how much you can change the environment by changing one little thing. And, that's the same basic thing, of course, that happens anytime a new technology is invented. We have the computer. Yeah. The computer is actually a pretty simple thing, but that one shift all of a sudden has completely reorientated our landscape. And if you could have gone back to when, ENIAC first went online in the 1940s and seen even a fraction of that, you would be so much richer than Elon Musk, because you would have seen all these opportunities miles before they came, And so that's world building. Yeah. And again, the thing there to do is, I just want to emphasize this to people. The rules that you shift and the worlds that you imagine are never going to come true. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the training is to build up those muscles in your brain. Yeah. Then what's going to happen is you're going to be sitting in your company, and then one moment you're going to actually have one of those moments where, because you've practiced this skill over and over and over again, something that comes up in a specific meeting or something you see while you're walking through the airport or whatever, you're suddenly going to be like, okay, that's the future. And because you've trained that muscle up in your brain, you have primed your brain to be ready to kind of do that huge world shift.
So I think this is a very important point, because I think at one point it was sounding like you could have been describing scenario planning, right? Where you're like looking at like different, medium, low and high risk environments, and regulations change, what effect does that have? And so you create these like very practical plans for these things that may, happen to some degree of intensity. But that's not what you're saying at all. You're saying like there's no output to that moment other than the training of the brain so that you are ready to respond when it comes up.
And scenario planning is exactly the same as brainstorming. I mean, it's always conditioned by your hopes and your fears. And you're just never, ever going to come up with the actual future that way, because it's always inclining to what you're nervous is going to happen or what you hope is going to happen. And so we've just done these studies over and over and over again, and we show that when you do scenario planning or brainstorming, people come up with basically 1% of the possibilities of the future, because they're so constrained. And of course, occasionally something that you hope or fear will come true. I'm not saying that it never comes true, but I'm saying that really only comes true about 1% of the time. And then, of course, you have this kind of bias, this affirmation bias, where you think, oh, look, I got it right that one time, and therefore my hopes are always true and my fears are always true. And what you want to do is you want to actually practice this outside of areas where you have immediate hopes and fears. And you want them to be real world scenarios so that you're not just in a fantasy space making up jetpacks or whatever, but so that you're actually training those muscles in a hard way. But you don't want them to be literally what your company is going to be dealing with in the next year or 5 years. You want it to be a more expansive space. And when you do that, I can guarantee you, you will start to see things coming in from outside. You'll start to see things opening, and you can't take advantage of most of those, but every once in a while something will come along and it will change the way your company operates.